David, I tell you, when I was down at the NACDA convention, it was the theme could have been loopholes and layoffs because schools like Duke, right here in our backyard, they've laid off through voluntary or maybe at some point they will be involuntary layoffs 42 members of their athletic staff. When you talk about loopholes, this is just the way that it works in college athletics. As soon as there is a rule or a structure put in place, you have an army of people on every campus that have one goal. Try to find a way around it. It's just like in the legal system, but it's in college athletics. And one thing you said with this new College Sports Commission coming into power, the NCAA becoming more and more irrelevant with every passing hour. Now, the NCAA is a whipping boy. They have been the target of so much angst and discontent over the years, but it's important to remember that the NCAA and the rules that it operates by are voted on by the members. So as the members are pointing fingers at the NCAA and the media is pointing fingers at the NCAA, they should be looking right back in the mirror because it's the members that make the rules. When you talk about opt-in and the optics of that, with the leadership of this new College Sports Commission reporting to the commissioners, this is the inmates running the asylum. This was a big part of it. When you talk about NIL deals, I was with one SEC athletics director that literally got on the phone and was talking to a potential corporate partner that said, I need $500,000. I need you to pay 10 athletes $50,000 and we'll get them to do some social media stuff. This is going to be a mess. So my question to you, attorney David Glenn, as you put on your JD hat here, with this new College Sports Commission in charge, will it handle the enforcement instead of the NCAA, in your opinion, in a better way because of the powers that you outlined earlier?
There's optimism because of that subpoena power, but it was shocking to a lot of people, just the fact that the NCAA has handed over this enforcement process to somebody else. There's a growing list of examples, even with NIL, for example. Instead of the NCAA suggesting a template for what college athletes should sign, if you're getting something in terms of revenue sharing from your school, you might have to sign a deal that includes a confidentiality clause. You might have to sign it. You're not allowed to publicly state the details of how much money you're getting from your school. Maybe that same contract could have a buyout clause, which we're much more frequently understanding in the context of coaches. Most fans know that coaches' contracts have buyout clauses, right? They're negotiated. Not only are we negotiating what school pays coach to coach, but we negotiate these clauses. Hey, if the school fires the coach before the end of the deal, what does the coach get in his buyout going away present? But also, if the coach leaves voluntarily prior to the end of his deal, what does the school get from the coach as a buyout for his early departure? Well, in this new world where more athletes are getting more money than ever before, the NCAA does not want any part of coming up with, let's just say, a boilerplate contract. Why? They don't want to be on the receiving end, the NCAA, of a lawsuit that contract might be deemed to be unlawful. So what do? They hand the baton to the conferences. Well, the conferences don't want to come up with a contract either. They hand the baton to the individual schools. And you are going to see stories of individual schools with individual contracts where it's coming. There's going to be and a lot of fans will love to hear this. Those upset about the last 4 years of name, image, likeness money have often said, well, if the player's going to get more than he's ever gotten, shouldn't he give up more? Shouldn't he be more committed to the school since he's receiving more to be an athlete at that school? Part of this new world is going to be a contract where, yes, in some cases, if that term is negotiated, if I pay Mike Waddell $1 million a year to be my star point guard and Mike chooses to leave on a 3-year deal 1 year into it, yes, I can write into Mike's contract that he owes me, the school he's leaving, some amount that we would negotiate that he would have to pay me to leave. I bring up the contract language example because the same thing is happening with the NCAA enforcement process. The NCAA is tired of being sued and usually losing in more contexts than we can count, but including enforcing its own rules. So it's handing the baton to the College Sports Commission, which does report to these 5 power conference commissioners. And they have had to come up with this entirely new framework. The decision makers in the Power 5 conferences, as we speak in the summer of 2025, with the college football season almost here, they're still working on the details of their enforcement structure. So, July 1st can come and go, and the new system is already underway, and they're still ironing out the details of the enforcement system. We do know this, though. Even before there are any sort of penalties, there are going to be alternatives. For example, if you submit a deal to the Deloitte Fair Market Value Clearinghouse for $1 million, and the clearinghouse says that this business relationship you described, according to our algorithms and our data and our research, it really has a value of $500,000. You, the athlete, or your agent on your behalf, has the right to resubmit that deal at the lower amount that Deloitte says is the more accurate amount. And you actually also have the right to appeal to an arbitrator if you think your higher number, the 1 million, can be justified. Now, arbitration process, that takes a while, usually longer than a month, even in these tight situations. So who knows how many appeals there's going to be? Who knows how built out that infrastructure is by the College Sports Commission? They're going through all of this for the first time, as are the athletes, as are the agents, as are the coaches, as are the folks at Deloitte who have had to create this NIL Go system. But you do have the right to appeal. You do have the right to resubmit at the lower number. If you choose to simply accept that $1 million deal, let's say from a collective, at the same number that Deloitte rejected, and they said, oh, that is not fair market value, that looks like buying a player, you can be declared ineligible by the new College Sports Commission. Are they going to do that? Will they do it quickly, easily, boldly, firmly, in a way that maybe sends the ripple effect all across college sports? We'll see. Again, this whole structure is not flushed out yet. But similarly, we do know that schools under this new system would be subject to penalties. There can be multi-million-dollar fines. There could be a postseason ban in a sport. There can be a reduction in the number of transfers in this new world that you're allowed to admit in a given sport. There can be suspensions for coaches, suspensions for athletic directors or administrators if they're found to be, fudging the numbers or otherwise breaking the rules related to that $20+ million revenue sharing cap. There also will be penalties in this new system for tampering with athletes who are under contract with another school. Although, again, those penalties have not been specified yet as you and I are having this conversation. So will it turn out to be another version of the Wild Wild West? Are we just inviting more, examples of stacking cash in brown paper bags the way that some schools got away with quite a bit in the 1970s and 1980s, and some infamously got caught for doing that kind of thing? We don't know the answers to all these questions yet because the system is so new, but there will be an infractions infrastructure in place. It just remains to be seen how strict they're going to be with this enforcement and how large the penalties are going to be. Although right now the posturing is such that the penalties are going to fit the crime, so to speak, and they want these deals to look like actual business transactions. I'm paying this athlete for valuable services in return rather than the pay for play concept that, again, even though everybody is calling this semi-professional college athletics, one of the NCAA's red lines is no pay for play, no full professionalism, no employee status, and the NCAA has shown no indication that it's going to back off of those red lines, even though it has obviously agreed to tweak the system in countless ways with this new House settlement. If you are anywhere near Wilmington, North Carolina, and looking for a little live music, a cold beer, a tangy slushie, a fun crowd, or just a taste of the good life at the beach, Jimmy's Bar in Wrightsville Beach is the place for you. Located on North Lumina Avenue, just 1 block from the sand and waves of the Atlantic Ocean, Jimmy's features a full bar with nightly beer and drink specials, and it hosts musical performers almost every day of the year. One more fun fact, Jimmy's annual Children's Bike Drive, which started in 2017, now distributes more than 1,000 bicycles and helmets per year to young people in the Wilmington area and beyond. Jimmy's Bar, your home away from home on Lumina Avenue in Wrightsville Beach.
David, you're an attorney, and I'm a former AD. And if I had an employee out of the 120 that worked for me when I was the director of athletics, if I gave them a job description and paid them a salary, they were an employee. You mentioned that the athletes now in college athletics will be receiving contracts. If they're getting a contract, why are they not an employee?
Employee status is a somewhat complicated area of the law. One of the key elements is how much the employer or potential employer controls the details of the activities that the employee is being compensated for. And one thing that the NCAA is going to continue to argue here, Mike, is that the compensation is not to play football. This new revenue sharing is not compensating you to play for my men's basketball team or my wrestling squad or my softball team. This new revenue sharing concept is to give you, an athlete, a slice of the pie because we're on TV and because we sell jerseys, sometimes with you, the star athlete's number on it. And in the past, they weren't allowed to benefit from those things at all. And over the last 4 years, they were sort of allowed to benefit from it. But the NCAA is going to continue to argue they're not employees because we are just giving them a slice of this TV-related pie. And there are great differences between the college model and the professional model, and they would elaborate on that, right? And of course, many are already ordering. And Mike, as you know, there are lawsuits as we speak. The House settlement did not resolve all lawsuits. It resolved and rolled into one, 3 massive lawsuits. House is the name of an actual former Arizona State swimmer. His last name House. That's how this lawsuit got its name. Our old friend Dwayne Carter at Duke University, guest on the David Glenn Show, he was actually one of the lead plaintiffs on another case. They had enough similarities that they were rolled into one, and they led to what's called the House settlement, which did resolve and tie up the loose ends on all 3 of those massive class action lawsuits. However, there are other lawsuits that are still lingering. There are individual athletes, Mike, who opted out of the House settlement, as was their legal right, because they didn't think that the number crunching was going to be fair for them. And for those who don't know, if you were a lower profile athlete in a lower profile sport, the House settlement to you, seriously, could mean $300. $300. Now, if you were, let's say, the star player in one of the high revenue sports at a school with a massive exposure factor, on TV all the time, really popular, huge fan base, maybe it helps if it's in a very populous part of the country or whatever. They have a lot of analytics that go into valuing such things. Whereas that athlete who opted into the House settlement as a no-name small sport athlete is going to get $300. That star athlete, prominent program, high revenue sport might get $1.5 million in what is back compensation. These lawsuits were essentially saying we should have been allowed NIL going back to 2016. And the lawsuit extended all the way through those who were athletes in 2024. So that 8-year period. But it's not like everybody got the same amount. There's some number crunching that decides why this person gets more, this person gets not just less, but a lot less. Individual athletes opted out of that lawsuit so that they can still individually sue for what they believe their actual damages were, rather than just be rolled into these lawsuits. So The law is a complicated thing in some areas, but the NCAA absolutely does not want pay for play. The NCAA absolutely does not want these athletes to be considered employees. They view it as an educational athletic mission, even though we all know the extensive hours required to be a major college athlete these days. It is true that professional athletes have their worlds, even more scrutinized, even more exaggerated and detailed requirements of them in terms of the length of the season, the amount of travel, and the day-to-day management of just their dedication to their craft, if you will. So there are going to be arguments in both directions. There are ongoing lawsuits asking the courts to declare college athletes employees, but some college athletes don't even want to be called employees, and the NCAA member schools certainly don't want. There are tax repercussions if that happens. There are workers' compensation repercussions if that happens. It becomes an entirely new world. 4 years ago, you and I talked about a new world because of the advent of name, image, likeness, and that was a massive change. Immediately eligible transfers was another massive change. This House settlement that we're describing, another of the most massive changes, if not the most, in the 100-plus year history of the NCAA. So I would argue that the majority of the biggest changes in college sports history, if we made a top 10 list, the majority of that top 10 would all be within the last half a dozen years or so. But one huge step that hasn't happened yet is that employee step. That's going to be for the courts to decide. And as we speak, the NCAA has never had more lobbyists in Washington, D.C., asking the United States Congress essentially to codify much of what's in the House settlement, to give them an antitrust exemption so that they're not as vulnerable, the NCAA, to these ongoing lawsuits that have not yet been resolved. They're asking Congress to make sure that this new NCAA framework preempts any state laws, and there are some out there that are trying to give their in-state universities a competitive advantage by creating name, image, likeness rules and laws that are different than what the NCAA is now adopting. So we'll see how that plays out in the halls of the United States Congress. I can tell you that the Republican Party tends to favor the NCAA's point of view. The Democrats, being, and you need enough of them to make this a law, tend to not want to give the powerful NCAA that has been caught exploiting athletes many, many times and has only been forced into this new world where these athletes get a bigger slice of the pie. Generally speaking, the Democrats simply don't trust the powerful NCAA enough to give them some long-term, wide-ranging antitrust exemption. And their attitude is more, well, if you don't want to get sued, do a better job of following the rules that are designed not to exploit the less powerful in favor of the more powerful. So it's going to be hard for the United States Congress to offer a resolution here, at least in the short term. Certainly under the current administration, there's so much divisiveness. In the longer term, even under a more sane version of America, I'll call it, I think it's more likely that the judicial system, judges ruling on individual cases, are going to determine this employee issue rather than the United States Congress waving some kind of magic wand and making all these questions go away. The Lawson Insurance Group in Raleigh is a family-owned business led by three actual brothers who happen to be huge sports fans: Ken Lawson, Miller Lawson, and Michael Lawson. I know these guys, I trust these guys, and I send these guys my own insurance business and that of my family. The next time you have insurance needs, I hope you'll do the same. The Lawson Insurance Group is known for its commitment to community and its dedication to ensuring that North Carolinians and their businesses are prepared for life's inevitable challenges, with the reminder that as a high street insurance partner, Lawson Insurance Group offers local expertise and support that, combined with High Street's extensive national resources, means more choice and support for you as their client. To learn more, search Lawson Insurance Group online. The Lawson Insurance website will be the first link that pops up.
Darren Mensah is the former starting quarterback for Tulane, and he is now Manny Diaz's new QB1 over at Duke. He was a top rated transfer in the portal, and he'll have 3 years of eligibility remaining at Duke. Reportedly, he's making $3.5 million guaranteed for this year and next year, plus has a pretty cakewalk to a $500,000 bonus, meaning he's going to be paid potentially $4 million a year. That is also reportedly, and I use that word reportedly because Duke is a private institution, not public, so these things aren't officially available. But we have it through sources that Mensah, the quarterback who has never played a down in Durham and will not be recognized by anybody, so his market value is pretty questionable. He'll make more than the Duke University president, but the quarterback is not an employee and the president is. And when you talk about the finagling going on right now, one of my stops in college athletics was I was the former senior associate director of athletics for external relations at the University of Arkansas. Well, the great state has become the first state in the United States to enact a law, David, that exempts name, image, and likeness payments from state income tax. That is led by Republican Arkansas Governor Sarah Huckabee Sanders. She signed the bill into law this past April, and it's retroactive to January 1st as part of the Arkansas Student Athlete Publicity Rights Act. The sheer tonnage of finagling that is going on is crazy to me. And for anyone to think that a brand new group made up of accountants with no experience in college athletics are going to come in and run a cleaner shop, a more frictionless model than what the NCAA has done for all of its very, very public deficiencies. That's crazy to me. It just doesn't make sense. And earlier you mentioned that the impact of the House settlement will vary from conference to conference. So it gets even more murky out there. How is that going to work?
Well, if a school is a member of one of the power conferences, mainly the ACC, Big 12, Big 10, and SEC, although the Pac-12 does still exist technically, that school is subject to the House settlement automatically. There's no opt-in, opt-out because those conferences were defendants in the House lawsuit, and their lawyers were among those negotiating this agreement on their behalf. So, of course, those schools, including the 4 ACC schools here in our backyard, are obligated to play by these new rules, whether they like it or not. But even within those leagues, different schools do have the right to make different decisions on various aspects of this new world. So, for example, as we mentioned, the estimate, it could change, but the 20.5 or so million in 2025, 2026 revenue sharing is a cap. It is a ceiling. It is not a requirement. Now, the expectation is that almost every power conference school will spend to that $20+ million cap, although that will be more difficult at places like Boston College or Wake Forest or other private universities that traditionally have had much smaller athletic budgets than most of their bigger public university rivals. Another thing to remember is that each of these schools has another major and also potentially extremely expensive decision to make regarding how much to expand the number of athletic scholarships it offers. Wait until you hear about the switch, again, because of the House settlement, from scholarship limits. Many fans are used to hearing about 85 scholarships for FBS level football teams, or 13 scholarships for men's basketball teams, or 11.7 scholarships, counting the partials for baseball, for example. There's this transition, again, part of the House settlement. The 20.5 revenue sharing is the most famous headline, but the switch from scholarships to roster caps is a very important thing. Under the new rules, if you, as an individual school, want to give a full athletic scholarship for every athlete in every sport, and you let each of your coaches carry a roster all the way to the sport's new roster cap, again, that is not required. Just like a salary cap says you can spend up to that, but you don't have to go all the way up. A roster cap says you can carry that many players, but you don't have to carry that maximum number of players. if you just said, we as a university, we're going max roster cap in every sport we have on campus, and we're going to give that many full athletic scholarships in each of those sports. You're talking, depending on the school, because not everybody has the same sports or the same number of sports, you could be talking about a new expense. Think about this as a longtime athletic director yourself. You would have not only the $20+ million new line item expense in terms of revenue sharing in this let's fully fund all sports with full scholarships all the way to the roster limit, depending on the school again, you're talking about a new $5 to $10 million commitment per year on top of the 20+ million. So, and that again, that number is going to go up every year moving forward. So even if you're at a school that typically makes and spends at a higher dollar level, in the ACC, for example, all of the schools I'm about to mention have had recent years where their athletic budgets were $150 million or more. Some of them are much closer to 200 million. In a few cases, maybe even a year over 200 million. But in the ACC, Clemson, Duke, Florida State, Louisville, Miami, UNC, Notre Dame, Stanford, Virginia. I think I just named half the league. They've all had recent years where their athletic budgets were over $150 million in a given year, and again, some significantly higher than that. Even at those schools, two new line items that would add up to $25 or $30 million a year in a given year, that adds up to a lot of money. That's really hard to figure out when you crunch the new financial numbers. In our state, there is a much different decision or set of decisions to be made even beyond the highest profile schools. Imagine if you're App State, Charlotte, or ECU. Well, you play FBS level football, but their budgets as members of Group of Five conferences are very small compared to the budgets in the Power Five. And there's absolutely no way that App State or Charlotte or ECU can afford to pay revenue sharing money all the way to the $20+ million cap. You've been at large schools, small schools, and in between. The big schools are almost all going to spend to that $20+ million cap in this new revenue sharing. The other schools just can't do it. The App States, Charlotte's, ECUs, they also have a lot of difficult decisions to make about how many scholarships to provide in each sport. Because now, again, the rules say you're permitted to offer full scholarships all the way up to the roster cap in every sport. So in baseball, for example, the scholarship limit has been 11.7 per year for a long time. Now the new roster cap is 34 players. That's actually a smaller roster than what most baseball programs have carried at the college level. So the roster cap, the roster size is going down, but the number of scholarships you're allowed to offer is going up. In fact, it's going from 11.7 to a new maximum of 34. Now, some schools are going to say, hey, man, we only have the money to continue funding 11.7, or maybe they'll go up to 12 or 13 baseball scholarships per year. And you can still split them among partial scholarships, et cetera, as long as they, add up to whatever the number, the cap that it's permitted is. Most schools are not going to be able to just triple the number of baseball scholarships that they offer. You'd be tripling the amount you're spending on baseball scholarships. And in some other sports, I don't have all of the new roster caps in front of me, but instead of men's basketball coaches thinking of the 13 scholarship limit, they now think of the 15 roster cap limit. And not everybody's going to offer 15 men's basketball scholarships. A lot of coaches believe that having too many guys at the end of the bench who don't play a lot is bad for team chemistry. So you could still have non-scholarship players on your 15-man roster. I wouldn't be surprised if a lot of ACC schools and others settled in, to that 12 scholarship player range, even though they're now allowed to offer 15 men's basketball scholarships. Some football rosters have been 150 people. So that cap is now 105 in the sport of football, which they're doing a grandfather thing so that not everybody's position is being eliminated. There's going to be a grandfather clause that prevents the full roster cap limits from being implemented immediately. The judge didn't want so many sort of cast-offs, if you will, under the new system. So there'll be a little grandfather effect for a few years. But there are a lot of decisions to make in a lot of sports about how close to the roster cap you want to go, and it's more specifically how many scholarships you want to offer up to that roster cap. One thing we do know is that the American Athletic Conference, which does include both Charlotte and ECU here in our backyard, has instituted a floor of sorts for those who want to remain a member of their league. But that floor is a sign of the enormous disparity that we're describing between the Power Four leagues and the Group of Five leagues. The American Athletic Conference schools are being required by their own conference to spend at least $10 million in revenue sharing money over these next 3 years. So you could spend 2 1 year and then 3 and then 5, as long as it ends up to 10 million over 3 years. Well, if you're spending 2 or 3 or 5, and these ACC schools and Big 10 schools, Big 12 and SEC schools are spending 20 plus million a year in revenue sharing, obviously you are falling even farther behind as you sometimes have to try to compete against those schools on the playing fields. If you want to spend more than that in the American, for example, you can. Some of the wealthier schools in the Group of Five are going to spend much bigger amounts. But obviously, spending 3 million or 4 million in new revenue sharing money is a tiny amount compared to what's being spent in those power conferences each year. Because of this, the gap between the Power Four and the Group of Five is going to grow even larger because of the House settlement. It's not that App State or ECU or Charlotte will never beat UNC or NC State or Duke or Wake Forest head to head in football or basketball or something else in whatever sport, obviously. But I do think it's fair to say that it will be even more difficult to do that moving forward than it was in the past, both for money specific reasons, revenue sharing, but also for scholarship number reasons, another huge financial element. The rich are definitely going to get richer in that regard, and the poor are getting poorer, as that old saying goes. I'm fascinated to see what a proud baseball program such as ECU or a proud football program such as that at Appalachian State, how far up the ladder are they capable of going? Not again to that 20 plus million dollars revenue sharing cap, but just how many million per year. I'm sure much of it will go to football at App, and a significant chunk will go to football, and a significant chunk will go to men's basketball and baseball at ECU. But again, athletic directors' job descriptions have gotten more complicated, and there are more decisions to make. You've got 15 or 25 or 30 plus coaches looking at you for some slice of the revenue share pie and some increase in athletic scholarships for their sport specifically. And especially at the mid-level schools and the smaller budget schools, there's just no way that you can make all of those coaches happy. When you go further down the Division I ladder, our state, remember, has 7 FCS football programs, and it also has 15 men's basketball programs that play outside the Power Four conferences. The athletic budgets are even smaller, and they vary widely from school to school and even from team to team. So I did mention earlier, there is an option to opt out of the House settlement entirely if any school thinks that this new world is too expensive or too far astray of the amateur principles that guided NCAA sports for decades. But at this point, the only conference, as we have this conversation, the only conference that has opted out of the House settlement and this new framework is the Ivy League, which has stuck much more to amateurism principles for many, many years in many ways. There are a few schools that the House settlement does not apply to. Army and Navy and Air Force Academy athletes have never been allowed to take NIL money anyway. So, you can even take 2 members of the American Athletic Conference out of that equation. But beyond them, the academies and the Ivy League, there have been very few opt-outs so far. One last thing on this. These new House settlement rules take effect, right? July 1st, 2025. The deadline for schools to opt out was June 30th, one day before. Although opting out or opting in, is not a forever decision. You do get to make that decision every year, essentially, at that time. But it's something that has had athletic directors scrambling because many of them weren't even sure they understood how this new system was going to work and all of its financial repercussions and the enforcement process and all the rest, as the clock was ticking on them to give their by June 30th answer as to whether their university, their athletic department was opting into the House settlement or just going to choose to play by the old rules where there is no revenue sharing with your athletes. And it is a lot closer to that Ivy League model where you're staying more true to those amateur principles that have been in place for many decades now.